Here's one of the greatest secrets of sales success. Don't talk to customers. Do not talk to buyers and potential buyers. Let's look at what that means. Sales principles never change. Sales is a science, not an art. Much of what we thought was an art in our selling has now been explained through science, different sciences like psychology, and the principles are going to keep on keeping on. Ethics, integrity, understanding the customer, showing that you're more interested in their success than you are yours. The sales process, however, is a mind-to-mind event. It's a function that goes on between our mind and the mind of the buyer. Now, it's true we can use all five senses when we're selling, but they all lead toward changing the understanding of the buyer's mind as it relates to our product or service or our event. Average retention declines by 80% in one day. So whatever I say from the platform when I'm speaking or training, I know the next day they'll retain maybe 20% of it, and it continues to go down from that unless we improve it to 90% retention by using interaction and visuals and other senses. So here we're looking at what can we do to generate more interaction with our buyers. We have interactive PowerPoint, interactive Excel, interactive other technologies that we could be using in our sales presentation. Why don't we use them? But here we want to look at what we can do in every sales event, in every conversation, professional or personal, to generate interaction, and that is to use questions. Questions instead of statements. I had my attorney check the federal laws and the state laws, and she came back and said, you're not required to answer a customer's question. If a customer asks you a question, you don't have to answer it. When we entered in sales, we were probably told, well, if the customer asks you a question, you darn sure better be able to answer it. Well, that's really not the case. And besides, did your mom teach you it's not polite to answer a question with a question? Yep, well, was your mom in sales? No, so she didn't know. There's an exception to that rule. Those of us in sales do not have to answer a customer's question, a buyer's question. Here's the principle. The human mind cannot not respond to a question. The human mind cannot not respond to a question. If I ask you a question, your brain kicks into gear and you can't stop it. What does a Hershey bar look like? Now try to keep the Hershey bar out of your mind. You simply can't do it. Questions create interaction. Now that's what we're looking for. Questions create interaction. And they return the needed information, what we need to know in order to help the customer. And questions convert knowledge into understanding. See, we can sit and listen. If we listen intently, we might hear what the person is saying, but to be most effective, to be a sales legend, to be one of the greatest of all times, we need to understand what the customer is trying to achieve, what is their desired outcome. The person at the table who knows the most about the other person wins. In sales, the person at the table who knows the most about the other person and their business wins. When we're talking, we're giving all of that to the buyer or potential buyer. And besides, how much can you learn from talking as you can from asking? I had an opportunity once to help a client, a startup company. They were not only starting up a company, they were starting an industry. And as we grew and as we were about ready to launch, we learned that there was a competitor in Orlando, Florida. My client was based in Denver. And so I went to Orlando on a speaking engagement and looked around. We couldn't find anything. They had no website, no web presence. We couldn't find anything about these people. Now, this is how small the world is. I was flying from Chicago to Portland, Oregon. Guess who my seatmate was? The young VP of sales of the company in Orlando. I began asking questions. What do you folks do? He told me. How do you do it? He told me. How do you differentiate yourself in the marketplace? He told me. He laid out an 18-month strategic plan to a total stranger. Why? Just because I asked. We don't want to be guilty of doing something like that, do we? Okay, here's how we do it. Jeopardy selling. How do they play the game show Jeopardy? Give the answer in the form of a question. Use questions whenever possible. Now, after you've started doing this for a while, it'll come second nature. I still have to catch myself sometimes wanting to answer a question, but if I just remember, phrase it in the form of a question, I get positive results. So phrase as much of your sales call, your conversation with your buyer or customer, as you can in the form of a question. In fact, when we feel like they're digging in, when we're getting close to making a deal, I will pause before I answer. I already know the answer. The customer is asking me a question. I know the answer. How could I answer this? How could I generate a response in the form of a question? We could ask for clarification. You can also use a statement and then close that out with a question. Here's an example, a typical example. What is your delivery time? Well, let's say that you know your delivery time is 5 business days. How do you make that a question? You just simply follow it up with, would you need it sooner? And now we begin to understand the buyer's buying motivation. Is there a sense of urgency? Is there value to having a speedier delivery? So stop talking to customers. Start using questions. Questions can become your new best friend. Who was the greatest of all-time salesperson? Could it have been Napoleon Hill? I hear his name used a lot. Well, Napoleon Hill wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, and many salespeople have said that that book was essential for their sales success. It taught them how to interact with other people. You know where Napoleon Hill got the information for his book? From interviewing other successful people. And that's what we're doing here with this network. We're looking at coming up with the absolute best sales secrets. We're sharing ideas in the comments section. So if you haven't put comments down there yet, now's a good time for you to think about doing it. So we're going to share ideas. You see, whenever two minds come together, a third mind is created. And that's why we use this mind-to-mind process. He inspired millions of people. Napoleon Hill quoted the all-time greatest salesperson, in my estimation, in his book, and he quoted many of the biographies that have been written about that salesperson, but Napoleon Hill was not the GOAT. So when you think about your next sales call, as you're planning your call, and while you're putting your questions together, begin thinking about how you could turn any customer question into a question of your own. You already know all the questioning techniques, open-end, closed-end, forced choice, multiple choice. Take that arsenal with you when you go on your next call, and remember, teach others.